Imagine this: a struggling young boy, disabled and hungry, musters the courage to ask for food at a diner, only to be publicly humiliated by a heartless waiter. But what the waiter doesn't realize is that one of the most beloved actors in the world is sitting just a few feet away, watching everything unfold. This isn't just a story about cruelty, it's about redemption, kindness, and the power of standing up for what's right. When Keanu Reeves steps in, the entire diner is about to witness a moment they'll never forget. What happens next will leave you breathless and remind you that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they're just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The sun was setting over the bustling city, casting a warm golden glow over the streets. The hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the occasional honk of a car horn created the symphony of urban life. Among the crowd, a small, unassuming diner stood on the corner of 5th and Maple. It was a modest place, with a faded sign that read Joe's Diner in peeling letters. Inside, the smell of greasy fries and sizzling burgers filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of coffee. At a corner table, partially hidden by the shadows, sat Keanu Reeves, dressed in a simple black hoodie and jeans. He was almost unrecognizable. His dark sunglasses shielded his eyes, and a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead completed the disguise. He sipped quietly on a cup of coffee, observing the world around him. Keanu often sought out places like this: ordinary, unpretentious spots where he could blend in and simply exist without the weight of his fame. The diner was moderately busy. A group of teenagers laughed loudly in a booth, an elderly couple shared a milkshake at the counter, and a tired-looking waitress shuffled between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. Keanu watched her for a moment, noting the weariness in her eyes. She looked like she'd been on her feet for hours, yet she managed a polite smile for each customer. Then, the door creaked open. A young boy, no older than 12, shuffled inside. His clothes were worn, his sneakers scuffed, and his face bore the marks of hardship far beyond his years. He walked with a noticeable limp, his right leg dragging slightly behind him. In his hands, he clutched a crumpled dollar bill, his fingers trembling as he approached the counter. The boy's name was Tommy. He had spent the better part of the afternoon wandering the streets, searching for something to eat. His stomach growled loudly, a constant reminder of his hunger. He had been saving that dollar for weeks, scavenging coins from sidewalks and recycling cans to add to his meager stash. Today, he had decided, was the day he would treat himself to a hot meal. Tommy approached the counter, his eyes scanning the menu board above. His heart sank as he realized that most of the items were far beyond his budget. But there, at the bottom of the list, was a small basket of fries for $1.50. He swallowed hard, his hope dwindling. He was 50 cents short. Still, he decided to try. He stepped up to the counter, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir," he said, addressing the waiter standing behind the register. The man was in his late 20s, with slick back hair and a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his face. His name tag read Greg. Greg glanced down at Tommy, his expression one of mild annoyance. "Yeah, what do you want?" Tommy held out his crumpled dollar bill, his hand shaking. I was wondering if I could get some fries. I only have $1, but I'm really hungry. Maybe you could help me out." Greg raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "You think this is a charity or something? We don't do handouts here, kid. If you can't afford it, then get lost." Tommy's face flushed with embarrassment. He lowered his head, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, I just thought." "You thought wrong," Greg interrupted, his tone dripping with disdain. "Now, unless you've got the full amount, I suggest you take your begging somewhere else." The other customers in the diner had begun to take notice. A few glanced over, their expressions a mix of pity and discomfort, but no one said a word. No one, that is, except Keanu Reeves. Keanu had been watching the entire exchange, his jaw tightening with each word Greg spoke. He had seen enough. Quietly, he stood up from his table and made his way to the counter, his presence commanding yet calm. Greg looked up as Keanu approached, his sneer faltering slightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone noticeably less hostile. Keanu ignored him, turning instead to Tommy. He knelt down so that he was at eye level with the boy, his voice soft and reassuring. "Hey, buddy, what's your name?" Tommy looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Tommy," he whispered. "Tommy," Keanu repeated, smiling gently. "I couldn't help but overhear. You're hungry, right?" Tommy nodded, his lower lip trembling. "Yes, sir." Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. He handed it to Tommy, his smile widening. "Here, get yourself something to eat, and don't worry about the change." "Okay." Tommy's eyes filled with tears as he took the money. Thank you," he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. Keanu placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You're welcome, Tommy. Now, go ahead and order whatever you want." Greg, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of shock and discomfort, suddenly found his voice. Sir, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, the kid can just. Keanu turned to face Greg, his expression hardening. You, he said, his voice low and steady, should be ashamed of yourself. Greg blinked, taken aback. Excuse me, you heard me, Keanu continued, his tone unwavering. This boy came to you for help, and instead of showing him even a shred of kindness, you humiliated him. Do you have any idea what that does to someone, especially a child? Greg opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He shifted uncomfortably under Keanu's gaze, his bravado crumbling. Keanu straightened up, his voice carrying through the diner. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances, and if you can't understand that, then you have no business working in a place like this. The other customers had fallen silent, their attention fully focused on Keanu. A few nodded in agreement, while others looked on in awe. The elderly couple at the counter exchanged knowing glances, their admiration for Keanu evident. Greg, now thoroughly chastened, lowered his head. I'm sorry, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Keanu's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. Don't apologize to me, apologize to Tommy. Greg hesitated for a moment before turning to Tommy. I'm sorry, kid, he said, his tone sincere. I was out of line. Tommy, still clutching the $20 bill, nodded slowly. It's okay, he whispered. Keanu gave Tommy's shoulder one last squeeze before standing up. He turned to Greg, his voice calm but firm. I suggest you take some time to reflect on your actions, and if I ever hear of you treating someone like this again, I'll make sure you regret it. Greg nodded, his face pale. Yes, sir. With that, Keanu turned and walked back to his table, leaving the diner in stunned silence. He sat down, picked up his coffee cup, and took a sip as if nothing had happened, but the atmosphere in the diner had shifted. The other customers exchanged glances, their respect for Keanu evident in their expressions. Tommy, meanwhile, approached the counter once more, this time with a newfound confidence. He ordered a cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake, his heart swelling with gratitude. As he waited for his food, he glanced over at Keanu, who gave him a subtle nod and a warm smile. When Tommy's food arrived, he carried it carefully to a nearby table and began to eat, savoring each bite. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better. As for Keanu, he finished his coffee and stood up, leaving a generous tip on the table. He glanced around the diner one last time, his gaze lingering on Tommy for a moment before he turned and walked out the door. The sun had fully set by now, the city lights casting a soft glow over the streets. Keanu pulled his hood up and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a diner full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. And as for Tommy, he would always remember the kind stranger who had shown him that even in the darkest of times, there was still light to be found. Epilogue. Word of Keanu's act of kindness spread quickly through the city. The story of how he had stood up for a disabled boy in a small diner became the talk of the town, inspiring countless others to pay it forward. Greg, the waiter, found himself reflecting deeply on his actions and eventually sought out Tommy to apologize once more. He even started volunteering at a local shelter, determined to make amends for his past behavior. Tommy, buoyed by the kindness he had experienced, began to believe in the goodness of people again. He found a mentor in a local community center, who helped him navigate the challenges of his disability and encouraged him to pursue his dreams. With time, Tommy's confidence grew, and he began to see a brighter future ahead. As for Keanu, he continued to move through the world with the same quiet humility and compassion that had always defined him. He never sought recognition for his actions, content in the knowledge that he had made a difference, no matter how small. And so, in a small diner on the corner of 5th and Maple, a single act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction of hope, proving that even in the most ordinary of places, extraordinary things could happen.